The letter from the Matrimonial Bureau had said the ranch was struggling. Nora Calloway had read that word 3 times before she packed her trunk, because struggling was a word she understood. She had been struggling herself for the better part of 4 years, since her father's mill went quiet and the town of Hatchett's Ferry decided that a woman alone with a head for numbers and no husband to give those numbers to was more trouble than she was worth. Struggling meant there was still something left to work with. Struggling meant the man had not quit. She arrived at the Birch Creek depot on a Thursday morning in late October of 1881 with a brown leather trunk, a canvas satchel worn soft to the handles, and the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from long practice at keeping everything useful close to the surface, and everything else pressed down where it could not slow her down. The mountains above the valley had already taken their first snow. The air carried the particular sharpness of a season that was not asking permission to change. The man she was to marry was not at the depot. His foreman was. A raw-boned fellow named Cutter, who held her letter from the bureau the way a man holds a piece of paper he has been told is important but cannot read himself, at arm's length, turned slightly sideways. He looked at her once, at her trunk, and then at the wagon behind him as though recalculating whether it had enough room. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Not a question. That's right. Mr. Aldrich sent me. He's tied up at the ranch." She had known men who sent someone else to collect their mail-order brides. She filed that information where it belonged and picked up her satchel. "Then we'd best not keep him waiting." Cutter loaded her trunk without conversation. She climbed up onto the wagon seat herself, settled her skirts, and watched the town of Birch Creek fall away behind them as the horses moved out onto the road that cut northwest into the valley. The land was wide here, open in a way that made some women feel exposed and made Nora feel, against her better judgment, something close to relieved. There was nowhere to hide out here for anyone. She had always found that clarifying. If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if a woman in your family came west with nothing and built a home, share her name in the comments. I read every one. Cutter did not speak for the first 3 miles. When he finally did, he did not look at her. "Ranch isn't a rough patch," he said. "The letter mentioned that." "Rougher than the letter mentioned, probably." She looked at the side of his face. He was a man who had said more than he meant to and knew it. "How rough?" He was quiet another beat. "Mr. Aldrich will want to tell you himself. Then I'll wait." She did not press him further. She had learned early that there were 2 kinds of people who withheld information: those who did it to protect themselves, and those who did it out of misplaced loyalty to someone else. Cutter had the look of the second kind. That was worth something. The Aldrich Ranch came into view in the early afternoon, and Nora took her first full measure of it without letting anything show on her face. The main house was timber-built and solid, 2 stories with a covered porch that ran the width of the front. The barn was large and in decent repair. 3 horses stood in the near corral, well-muscled, well-kept. The fencing along the lane was sound. The woodpile at the side of the house was stacked high and tight against the coming winter. She had expected worse. The word struggling, in her experience, tended to announce itself in rotting fence posts and empty feed troughs. What she was looking at was maintained. Whatever the trouble was, it had not yet reached the physical fabric of the place. The man on the porch was watching them come up the lane. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 34, 35, with dark hair and the squared-off build of someone who had grown up doing the kind of work that made the body compact and deliberate. He was not dressed for receiving a visitor. He was dressed for a day that had already involved mud and effort, and he had not changed. Whether that was negligence or honesty, she could not yet say. He came down the porch steps as Cutter brought the wagon to a stop, and he looked at her with an expression she could not immediately name. Not the appraisal she had feared, the kind that moved from face to figure to trunk and arrived at a verdict. This was something more considered. He looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they have not yet decided how to approach. "Miss Calloway." He reached up a hand to help her down. She took it, noted the grip, the calluses, the fact that he did not let go of her hand until she was steady on the ground. "Everett Aldrich." "I know." She retrieved her hand at her own pace. "Your foreman tells me things are worse than the letter let on." Something moved across his face. He looked at Cutter, who had developed a sudden intense interest in unhitching the horses. "We can talk inside," Aldrich said. "We can talk here if you prefer. I have no particular interest in going inside until I understand what I've come to." He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods along the near fence line, a sound like paper being turned. Then he said, "The Bureau described me as struggling." "That's true. What did not describe was why." "Then describe it." He looked at her straight. He had dark eyes, steady in their regard, the kind of eyes that had not yet learned to look away from things that were uncomfortable. "My father took on a silent partner 8 years ago. A man named Geddes. Thomas Geddes. He put in capital when the ranch needed expansion, took a share of the books in exchange." He paused. "I inherited the ranch 18 months ago when my father died. I inherited Geddes along with it. And Geddes is the problem. Geddes has been calling the accounts his way for 8 years. I have a ranch that looks sound and books that say otherwise." His jaw tightened, not in anger, in the particular way of a man who has been living with something he cannot fix by working harder. "I cannot get a proper loan on this land because every creditor who looks at the books declines. I cannot buy out Geddes because I cannot prove what his share actually is versus what he says it is. I am, as the letter stated, struggling." Nora was quiet for a moment. The horses shifted in the corral. Somewhere behind the barn a door banged in the wind. "Where are the books?" she said. He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The ledgers. The accounts. Where do you keep them?" He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she wondered if she had miscalculated, pushed too fast, arrived at the practical before he had finished arriving at the personal. Then something changed in his face, a slight recalibration, a readjustment of whatever he had expected this conversation to be. "Inside," he said. "Then show me inside." The parlor was clean and sparsely furnished, a place that had been kept rather than lived in, the kind of room that said a man had been alone in it for some time and had not quite given himself permission to make it comfortable. A stone fireplace, 2 chairs, a writing desk in the corner with a stack of ledgers that she could see even from the door. Aldrich went to the desk without being asked and brought the top ledger to the table. He set it down and stepped back, giving her room to approach it. That small thing, the stepping back, the giving of room, she noted. She opened the ledger. It took her approximately 4 minutes to understand the basic structure of what Geddes had built. It took her another 6 to understand the specific mechanism he had used. She turned pages carefully, running her finger along the columns, not speaking. Aldrich sat in one of the chairs by the fireplace and did not speak either, which was the right instinct. She had dealt with men who talked through her silences. She had learned to distrust them. When she finished, she closed the ledger and set her hand flat on the cover. "You don't know what you have," she said. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean that what Geddes has done here is not what it appears to be on the surface." She tapped the ledger. "He has structured these accounts to make the ranch appear indebted to his initial investment in perpetuity. Every year, the interest on his original capital stake is recorded as a current operating expense, which reduces the apparent profit, which in turn reduces the value of the ranch on paper. I know that much. I cannot prove the interest rate he's charging is. That is not the problem." She sat down across from him, because this was going to take longer than standing. "The problem is that he made an error in year 3. He recorded a dividend payment to himself twice. Once in the operating ledger and once in the capital account. Both are dated the same quarter." She opened the ledger again, turned to the page. "There, and there." He leaned forward. She watched him see it. "That means he's been drawing against the sum he already withdrew," she said. "The compounding interest he's applying since year 3 is built on a base amount that was never legally reinstated. He has been charging you interest on money he took back." She met his eyes. "This ranch does not owe Thomas Geddes what he says it owes him. By my initial reading, you are within 2 or 3 years of having satisfied the original investment entirely. He has simply been collecting against a ghost." The room was very quiet. Aldrich was looking at the ledger page with the particular expression of a man who has been carrying a weight so long he has forgotten what the weight is actually made of and has just been told it is hollow. You read this in 10 minutes, he said. 12, she said. I would have been faster, but your father's handwriting in the early pages is difficult. He looked at her then, the full look, not the assessing one from the wagon yard, but something more open, something that had not yet decided what it was. The bureau said you had some experience with accounts. My father ran a grain mill. He ran it well until he did not, and when he did not, I ran the books for 3 years while we tried to keep it solvent. She folded her hands on the table. We did not succeed, but I learned what bad accounting looks like from both directions, the kind built by negligence and the kind built deliberately. This is the second kind. Without question, he stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her looking out at the yard. She waited. Outside, Cutter was leading the unhitched horses toward the barn. The cottonwoods moved again in the wind. I have had 2 attorneys look at these books, Aldrich said, not turning. Neither of them saw what you just saw. Then they were not looking at the capital account alongside the operating ledger simultaneously. People tend to read one or the other. The error only appears when you hold both columns against each other at the same year. He turned. Geddes comes to the ranch quarterly. He is due in 6 weeks. She understood what he was asking without him asking it. 6 weeks is enough time to build a complete accounting of the discrepancy, provided the original investment documents are on hand. They're in the strong box in this room. Then we have what we need. She stood and picked up the ledger. I will need the other books as well. All of them, back to the beginning. He crossed the room and opened the writing desk, produced a key, went to the strong box in the corner that she had not noticed until now. He unlocked it without hesitation, lifted out a bundle of papers tied with twine, and brought them to the table. She looked at the bundle, then at him. You have not asked me anything about myself, she said, other than what I can do with those ledgers. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile. Too considered for that. I figured the question of what you can do is the more pressing one at the moment. That is a practical answer. I'm a practical man. He set the papers on the table beside the ledger. I wrote to the bureau because I needed someone steady, not someone decorative. The letter I sent said the ranch was struggling and the work was hard, and there was no guarantee of comfort in the near term. He paused. Most women declined. I did not. You did not. He looked at her. That told me something. She pulled the first ledger back toward her and opened the bundle of papers beside it. It told you that I was either brave or desperate. I was curious which. She smoothed the first page of the original investment document and began to read. You'll have to wait and see, she said. He sat down across from her again, and after a moment, he pulled a second ledger from the pile and opened it, and they worked in silence across the table from each other while the October afternoon light fell through the window and the ranch settled around them into the sounds of evening. The first week passed in the rhythm of 2 people learning each other's habits without discussing it. Nora was up before first light. Aldrich was up before her, which she discovered on the second morning when she came to the kitchen to find coffee already made and the man himself gone to the barn. She poured her cup and went to the ledgers. She built a parallel set of accounts in a fresh ledger. One column for what Geddes claimed, one for what the documents actually supported, one for the difference accumulating across 8 years. By the end of the first week, the third column had a total she read twice before writing down. On the 8th day, Aldrich came in from the yard and stood in the doorway in the way she had learned meant he had something to say and was deciding how. He never spoke before he was ready, but he always arrived in the room before he was ready, as though proximity helped. Geddes sent a letter. He's moving his visit up. 10 days. 10 days instead of 6 weeks. She kept her expression level. Why? Letter doesn't say. She read it. 3 lines. The handwriting of a man who expected to be obeyed. He heard something. Has anyone in town known you were expecting a wife? Someone connected to Geddes? I mentioned it to the attorney in Birch Creek. Sour. He handles ranch paperwork. A pause. Geddes uses the same office. She said nothing. He sat and looked at the parallel ledger. How much time do you need? Finished properly, 2 weeks. Well enough to hold the line against Geddes, 10 days. Then that's what we do. He pulled the stack of original documents toward himself and began sorting them into chronological order, the task she would need next. She had not asked him. He He had simply read the table and understood. She found it easier to work beside that kind of man. If you're still with us on this porch, do this story a kindness. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. These quiet stories don't get told if you don't share them. Tag someone who loves a true frontier story in the comments. Let them know we're telling these the way they deserve to be told. On the 5th day before Getty's was due, Nora walked the ranch. Numbers divorced from physical reality became abstract in ways that made them easier to dismiss. She needed to see what she was defending. The land was good. Pasture grass heavy even in October. Cattle healthy, horses well kept. The ranch was not struggling because it had been mismanaged. It was struggling because someone had designed it to look that way on paper. She came back to find Aldrich at the fence watching a gray horse with white face markings testing the rail in the careful way of an animal that had not yet decided whether to trust its enclosure. "Third family this year to sell in this valley," he said without turning. "Getty's doesn't only work this ranch. He's been a silent partner or creditor to half a dozen operations here over 15 years. The ones who sold, are any still in a position to document what happened?" He looked at her. She had been learning to read his silences by texture, and this one had something new in it, the look of a man watching something he suspected was coming and noting that it had arrived. "One set of corrected books is a dispute," she said. "Multiple accounts showing the same structure, the same mechanism, the same compounding against already withdrawn capital. That is a pattern. A pattern is harder to explain away." He named two. Ben Mercer, who had sold 2 years prior and kept everything his wife had insisted on preserving, and the widow Selman, whose husband's operation was the first Getty's had touched, living in Birch Creek now with every document her husband ever signed. Mercer came the following afternoon with a cigar box of papers. He was compact and sun-darkened, with the quality of a man who had been tricked by hope before and was cautious about putting down the weight he had carried since. He watched Nora work without speaking. 20 minutes. Same error. Different year, different quarter. Identical mechanism. "Did you show this to anyone?" she said. "Showed it to Sauer." Mercer looked at Aldrich. "Same attorney?" "Same." The widow Selman's papers arrived the next morning. Year 2 of the original investment. Earlier than either of the other accounts. The same double entry, the same ghost capital, a decade of compounding interest built on money already taken back. 3 ranches. One pattern. One hand. 5 days, Aldrich said. "Enough," she said, "to put in front of Getty's a complete accounting of what he has actually been owed versus what he has taken across 3 operations, with original documents behind every figure. And to do it before a witness who is not the attorney he shares with the men he has been stealing from." Mercer said, "Who?" "There's a land and commerce commissioner appointed by the territorial governor. His office is in Bridger Falls, 2 days' ride. He arbitrates disputes involving investment agreements. He does not work for Thomas Getty's." Mercer said he would write a statement that night. After he left, Aldrich sat at the table in the low afternoon light. "My father would have liked you," he said. She picked up the ledger and found her place. "Tell me about him." He did. The complicated version, the one that included the trust placed in the wrong man and the fact that none of that diminished what his father had built. Nora listened and kept working, and that was, she had learned, often the most useful thing she could offer, the willingness to stay in the room while the harder things were being said. For days until Getty's arrived. She turned to the next page and kept going. Thomas Getty's arrived on a Tuesday in a hired coach, which said something about a man visiting a ranch he intended to own. He brought a younger man who carried a leather satchel and had the look of someone paid to be present rather than useful. Getty's was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with a face that had learned to arrange itself into whatever expression the room required. He shook Aldrich's hand in the yard the way a man shakes the hand of someone he is in the process of outlasting. His eyes moved to Nora once, registered her, and moved away. "Miss Calloway," Aldrich said. "My wife." Getty smiled without warmth. "I had heard you were expecting someone. Shall we get to the books? I have a long ride back." They went inside. Nora had arranged the table the night before. Her parallel ledger sat in the center, closed. The original investment documents were stacked to the left, organized by year. Mercer's papers and the widow Selman's were set to the right, face down. The lamp was trimmed and lit. She had done this with the same attention she had given everything over the past 10 days, because the arrangement of a room before a difficult conversation was not a small thing. It told the other party, before a word was spoken, whether they were walking into disorder or into something prepared. Geddes looked at the table, and something shifted in his expression. Not concern. The first adjustment of a man recalculating. He sat. His associate sat behind him with the satchel. Geddes produced his own ledger and set it on the table with the confidence of a man presenting a document he had never had seriously questioned. As you can see from my most recent figures, the outstanding balance on the original investment, with compounding interest and the third quarter penalty adjustment. Before we go to your figures, Nora said, I would like to go to ours. Geddes looked at Aldrich. My wife handles the accounts, Aldrich said. She's more qualified than I am and considerably more thorough. I'd ask you to hear her out. Geddes folded his hands and produced the expression of a man extending patience he did not feel. By all means. Nora opened the parallel ledger. She began at the beginning, the original investment amount, the agreed interest rate, the payment record across the first 2 years. She let those figures sit where Geddes had no dispute with them, because establishing the ground where he would agree made the ground where he could not agree harder to abandon. She moved to year 3. This dividend withdrawal. It appears in both the operating ledger and the capital account, dated the same quarter. A clerical error. It was corrected. Show me the correction. The room was quiet. Wind moved through the cottonwoods outside. It was corrected in the subsequent filing, he said. The subsequent filing is here. She turned to the page. The withdrawal does not appear as a correction. It carries forward as a standing balance, which means the interest you have been compounding since year 3 has been calculated against a capital base that included funds you had already withdrawn. She looked at him. You have been charging Everett Aldrich interest on money that was no longer in this investment. Geddes' face had gone very still. Furthermore, she opened the documents to her right. Ben Mercer. His original investment papers show the same entry in year 2 of his agreement with you. Same structure. Same compounding against a withdrawn base. And the widow Selman's papers show it in year 2 of her late husband's agreement, which predates both. She spread the 3 sets of documents across the table. 3 operations. 1 mechanism. Over a decade. The silence had weight in it. Geddes looked at the documents the way a man looks at something he had been certain would never appear in a room he was sitting in. These are private agreements, he said. Whatever Mercer or the Selman woman has told you, they wrote formal statements, witnessed and dated, documenting the discrepancy between the terms they originally signed and what your accounting has claimed since. She folded her hands. Those statements, along with a complete accounting of all 3 operations, have been sent to the office of the Territorial Land and Commerce Commissioner in Bridger Falls. Geddes looked at Aldrich. Aldrich looked back at him with the flat regard of a man who has nothing left to hide. The Commissioner's office has acknowledged receipt, Nora said. An investigator will be in Birch Creek within the month. You are welcome to bring your own accounting. But I would suggest the discrepancy we have documented today will be considerably more difficult to characterize as clerical when it appears across 3 separate families over 15 years. Geddes stood, controlled, but the movement of a man removing himself before the room got smaller. You have no standing in this, he said to Nora, and it was the first thing he had said with any real edge, because it was what he had been holding since he walked in and looked at her and looked away. I have considerable standing, she said. I am a party to this ranch. I compiled the accounting you have seen, and my name is on the letter to the Commissioner's office. If you dispute that, raise it with the investigator. Geddes left without shaking anyone's hand. Nora and Aldrich sat at the table after the coach had faded down the lane. The documents were still spread between them, all the accumulated evidence of 10 days of work and 15 years of someone else's careful damage. You knew he would say it was clerical, Aldrich said. It was the only move he had. The Commissioner's office. You actually sent it. 3 days ago. Cutter rode to the post station at first light. She began stacking the documents back into order. I did not tell you because you had enough to manage. And because if Geddes had found you already certain of the outcome, it might have shown. He looked at her. You were managing me. I was managing the situation. You were part of it. Something moved across his face, closer to a smile than anything she had seen in 10 days of mornings and ledgers, and the kind of sustained, quiet effort that strips everything to what a person is made of. Stay, he said, not the arranged word of a man closing a business arrangement. The plain word of a man who had arrived somewhere he had not expected to arrive and was asking whether she had arrived there too. She looked out at the ranch through the window. The gray horse in the near corral had stopped testing the fence line. It stood at the center of the enclosure, calm and decided, no longer looking for a way out. I told you when I came, she said. I don't fold. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers, the same deliberate way he did everything that was worth doing. Outside, the cottonwoods moved in the wind, and the valley held the particular afternoon quiet that had stopped feeling empty somewhere along the last 10 days and had started feeling, against all reasonable expectation, like somewhere a person had the right to stay. Thank you for staying until the last word. If this story moved you, the next one is already up on your screen. Go give it a watch. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join the porch. We're telling stories about women who carried more than the world ever knew. See you in the next one.